Hola clase, hoy vamos a hablar del subjuntivo, or, as it's known in English, the subjunctive. We use the subjunctive in a formula, okay? So technically, let me walk you through the steps. Weirdo is when we use subjunctive. W is for wishes, so when we're wishing something for someone. E is for emotional phrases. So when we are expressing emotion about something that has happened. I is for indirect commands. So I don't say do this, I say, well, I need you to do this. That's an indirect command. R is for recommendations or suggestions. D is for doubt. Or disbelief. And O is for ojalá. Ojalá is a word in Spanish that means like hopefully. It comes from the Arabic. Allah means God, so it's kind of like Lord willing. And it's kind of like a wish. So what we're going to focus on for this section is using subjunctive to express wishes, indirect commands, and recommendations. Those are the three that we're going to focus on. Okay, so we have a formula for when we use the subjunctive. We use the subjunctive in sentences that have subject 1 plus verb 1 plus K plus subject 2 plus verb 2. So subject 1, for example, is I, and verb 1 is hope. K means that. Subject 2 would be you, and verb 2 would be dance, for example. Okay. In this case, our verb 2 is the verb that we put in subjunctive form. Okay. So again, subject 1 is I, verb 1 is hope, K is that, subject 2 is you, and verb 2 is dance. And that verb 2 is what goes in the subjunctive form. So how do we form the subjunctive? Well, this process will actually look very familiar to you. Step 1, you're going to go to the yo form in present tense. Step 2, you're going to drop the O. And step 3, you're going to put your ending. So what are your endings? Well, for AR verbs, our yo ending is A. Our to ending is es. Our ella ending is e. Nosotros hemos. And our ellos en. Ustedes and ellos. Okay? So es, hemos, en. Those are your verb endings. For your ER and IR verbs, we swap out our E's for A's. A, as, a, amos, an. Okay, so take a moment to read through this page. You'll notice that it talks about the subjunctive mood. And the subjunctive mood is probably a more accurate phrase. It's not a tense per se because it is present tense. It's a state of kind of uncertainty. Like you don't know whether the second thing is going to happen. It's just what you hope for or what you wish for or what you are requesting. Okay, so for example, and again, remember in the middle of our formula, we have to have the word que. So que is the sandwich part that goes in the middle of the formula. So in this sentence, quiero que, quiero is yo form of querer, so subject 1 is yo, verb 1 is quiero, yo quiero que, I want that, respires, you breathe, lentamente, slowly. So I want for you to breathe slowly. That's how we say it in English. But in Spanish, what it literally translates to is, I want that you breathe slowly. Okay? And then looking at the second one, el entrenador, the coach, so that's our subject 1, exige, let me mark these. Okay, so subject 1 we're going to mark in pink. Verb 1 we're going to circle in pink. Oops, nope, that's wrong. That's wrong. Ah, erase. Okay. So, subject 1 is el entrenador. Here, our subject 1 comes from the fact that it's in yo form. Our verb 1 is quiero, and our verb 1 is exige. Then, of course, we have que. And then, los atletas is subject 2. We're going to underline that in blue. And then estiren is our subjunctive verb because it's verb 2. So the coach demands that the athletes stretch their muscles. Okay? Looking at this last sentence, sugiero. Sugiero is kind of like quiero. It's in yo form, so we know our subject 1 is yo. And then sugiero is suggest. So I suggest that bebas, that's our second verb, and the subject is inside of it because bebas is in 2 form. So I suggest that you drink water before running. So subject 1 is yo, verb 1 is sugiero, que is our glue, 2 is our subject 2, and bebas is our verb 2. And of course that comes from the word beber. So it's an ER verb, but it takes an AS ending because we put it in subjunctive form. Okay? This right here is the impersonal expressions that I was the emotional expressions that I'm talking about. So if you express an emotion about something, then that would be an emotional expression or an impersonal idea. So es necesario, it's necessary. Es bueno, it's good. Es importante, it's important. Those would all be sentence starters for subjunctive. For example, es necesario que hagas ejercicio. Es is our subject 1, it is, and our verb 1. Necesario is an adjective. I'm just going to do a little squiggly. See if it'll let me do a little squiggly line. Es necesario que hagas ejercicio. So who's doing the exercise? It's in 2 form, so it's necessary that you do exercise. Okay, and again we have que in the middle as our glue between the indicative phrase. Indicative is a word that you haven't really heard before, but indicative we didn't need to use that word before we introduced the subjunctive. Indicative is just regular form. Everything we've learned before this moment is indicative. Subjunctive is what we're learning now. So the first half of the sentence is indicative or regular, and then we put the que, and then we know that what comes after the que is going to be subjunctive. The verb that comes after the que is subjunctive. Okay, es importante, squiggle, squiggle, that. So it's important that los jóvenes, subject 2, coman, verb 2, in subjunctive, bien. So it's important that the young people eat well. Okay, and this just reiterates the process. So our process is we go to the O form, we drop the O, and then we add our ending. Es, hemos, en for AR verbs, and as, amos, an for ER verbs, and for IR verbs. Okay? We also had to pay attention to and watch out for our zar, car, gar verbs. Because in subjunctive, just like in the commands form, we're putting an E after a C, and we can't do that. We have to change it to the C to QU. We're putting an E after a G, and that would change the sound. We don't want to do that, so we have to put a GU. And cruzar, we want to put an E after a Z. We can't do that without changing the sound. Actually, we can't do that. It's not allowed. So we have to change the Z to a C. So on this one and this one, it's because phonics would change, or the way that the word sounds would change if we don't change the spelling. And on this one, it's because it just doesn't exist. You can't put an E after a Z. Okay, so watch out for that zarkargar. Okay, so what are some clue words that we're going to use subjunctive? How do we express our wishes? Okay, well, I talked about one in English. I said I hope, which in Spanish, I hope is espero. So if you see espero que, chances are you're going to use subjunctive. Quiero, I want. That's a way to express wishes. Deseo, I desire. These are all ways to start a subjunctive phrase. Okay. Then we also have our recommendations. And with our recommendations, we use words like recomiendo, or sugiero, I suggest, or exijo, I demand. That kind of ventures into the realm of indirect commands. But these are ways of saying, oh, aconsejo, I advise. And of course, these don't have to be in yo form. You can say he advises that you study. So you can put it in ella form, you can put it in nosotros form. I'm just giving you yo form here as an example. Okay, so these should look familiar too, because these are the same irregulars that we had in our command forms. Okay, so we put them in this order. We used to say vaya, haya, sea, sepa, de este. Remember? So vaya, haya, sea, sepa, de este. Okay, and then it just has them in all their different forms. So yo form, tu form, el, ella, nosotros, vosotros, and ustedes, ellos, ellas. Okay, so just know that these 6 verbs are irregular in the subjunctive form, just like they were irregular in the commands form. So to recap, we have to watch out for our zarkargar verbs. We have to watch out for verbs with irregular yo form, because we have to catch that yo form in order to be able to do all forms of the subjunctive correctly. And then we have to watch out for our 6 irregular verbs, vaya, haya, sea, sepa, de, este. And then lastly, we have to watch out for stem changing verbs. And those, just like knowing the irregular yo forms, the stem changing verbs, you just have to know which verbs change stems. Okay? Here we're going to look at 2 different categories of stem changing verbs. We're going to look at our AR and ER stem changing verbs. Okay? And then we're going to look at our IR stem changing verbs. So some examples of AR stem changing verbs: jugar, pensar, sentarse, calentar, despertarse. Those all end in AR, so they're AR stem changers. And remember, we typically have verbs that go to O's go to UEs, E's go to IEs, or E's can also go to I's. Okay, so O's to UEs, E's to IEs, or E's to I's, which is what, we don't have an example here, but it's another one that exists. Okay? And with those, what happens is the stem change happens in the subjunctive inside the boot. Okay, remember this is our little boot. And outside the boot we have nosotros form. So in nosotros form, the stem doesn't change. So it's UE, 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 UE inside the boot, but outside the boot it just stays the U. Okay? Same thing here with pensar. E's change to IE's in the first part of the word inside the boot, but outside of the boot, nosotros over here, the E just stays an E. Okay? And same thing here. E changes to IE inside the boot, outside the boot, it doesn't change. It just stays an E. Okay, so that's what happens with AR and ER verbs that are stem changers. The stem changes in all forms except for nosotros. And for nosotros form, it's just like the original. J-U-G, J-U-G, P-E-N, P-E-N. Okay? Now, let's talk about IR verbs. IR verbs, because IR verbs are different. Okay, what happens with IR verbs? Well, inside the boot, they do their stem change. So far they look normal. Oops, I shouldn't have drawn over that. But outside the boot, things get wonky. Okay, so our E usually changes to IE, but outside the boot here, it's going to change to an I. Okay, our E usually changes to an I, and in this case, inside the boot it does. It changes to an I, but outside the boot it does too. So E's go to I's, and then O's go to UE's inside the boot, and outside the boot they go to just plain U. Okay? These are some other verbs that we see frequently that are IR verbs, and they are also stem changers, which means that when they're in any form except for nosotros or vosotros, you do the stem change, but then in nosotros form, an E will go to an I. An O will go to a U. Okay, so that pretty much sums up the subjunctive. First, we have to know our formula. Subject 1 plus verb 1 plus K plus subject 2 plus verb 2, which is the subjunctive verb. We need to remember how to form the subjunctive, and it's a three-step process. 1, you go to the yo. 2, we drop the O. 3, we put the ending that we need to use, which for AR verbs is going to have an E in it, and for ER verbs and IR verbs, it's going to have an A in it. So as, amos, an. Es, hemos, en. Okay? Third, we need to remember that we have different categories of irregular verbs. We have zar, kar, gar. We have the 6 special verbs, vaya, haya, sea, sepa, de este, and we have our stem changing verbs, where not only does the ending do this, it's flip-flops, okay, but we also have changes at the beginning of the word. So our E's go to IE's or I's, and our O's go to UE's. So keep in mind that those are the 3 kinds of irregular verbs we'll run into in the subjunctive. Okay, last thing I want to leave you with before this video ends is a chance to practice. So what I'd really like for you to do is I'd like for you to pause the video, and I would like for you to go through and figure out what the answers should be for activities 34 and 35. And please write these answers in your notebook. We will go over the correct answers during next class, and I will also next class, I will check to make sure that you did this activity, that you wrote the answers to activities 34 and 35. Okay? Also, don't forget that you will have a quiz next class, an open note quiz, and that these questions just might be on there. Okay?